energy, or ODO. Today, we will be discussing the Oregon Global Warming Commission's roadmap to 2030 and its work to adopt recommendations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Oregon. Today, I'll be kicking off the meeting with support from our Assistant Director for Planning and Innovation, Alan Zelenka, Christy Split, and Linda Ross. For our meeting today, we have a few key goals. One.
Hey, Maya, can I get you to maybe turn your video off? We're having trouble with your audio. Let's see if that works.
You keep cutting out, Maya.
Thanks.
Is that better?
Hopefully. Yeah. We'll see. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for letting me know. Sorry about that, everybody. So for our meeting today, our key goal.
Nope, not better.
Is that not better?
It's not yet. Why don't I go over the agenda, Maya, and do you want to leave and come back?
Sure.
Great, thanks. So what Maya would have said is that today's meeting agenda is that we're going to go over some administrative information about how the meeting will run and what's going on overall with the plans here. And then we'll also go into the roadmap to 2035, or what we affectionately call at the department, the TIGGER project. That'll include a project overview, consultant scope of work, because we've hired out expert consultants to work on this, and then modeling and the timeline. And then we'll get into a discussion when we want to hear from all of you that are on the line, and thank you so much for joining us, a discussion of the draft list of new actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I don't know if Maya's back. I think it's her shared screen, so it's good. I didn't really think about that part. So Alan, I think you were up next, right?
Yeah, you want to go through the facilitated meeting part? And,
oh, sure. I just can't advance the slides. Oh, there we go. Somebody has the slides. Sorry, I didn't know who had them. Sure. So as far as how this meeting will be facilitated, we have panelists that are ODO staff, and then SSG, our consultant, are also on as panelists. And then most of our attendees are on as participants. There'll be time reserved at the second half of the meeting for discussion, but you can send questions through the chat throughout the meeting, and I'll be the one who's monitoring the chat, making sure either we get back to you in the chat, or I'll be kind of keeping tabs and bringing things back up at the appropriate time if that's a better way to handle the particular chat. So just know we're listening to that chat and monitoring it throughout. We also at the department grabbed some community agreements from a recent equity conference that was held for state employees. And we will, and so we just thought it would be, we actually really liked them, and we've been using them to kind of frame up meetings that we're having afterwards. Hope that you agree with them. These are all designed to foster inclusive and respectful meeting today. And that includes being present, being respectful, remembering that we're here to learn and here as well to share perspectives both, and then being flexible and patient around any technology needs or changes, like the star of our show not having audio that's functioning right now. So we're working on fixing that behind the scenes, including having somebody else take over the slide deck to project that. So hang tight. We might lose the slide deck and get it back in a second. So thank you for your patience with this. We all got on and tested and everything was smooth, but you never know. So if you do have any questions, if you go into the chat, you can chat Linda Ross, and Linda's our person who can help with any technical needs throughout. And then do you want to go to the next slide? And then after, maybe hopefully somebody is working to grab this slide deck and share it so Maya can leave and come back. Okay, Maya's going to go now. And hopefully we have a slide deck, and if we don't, we'll all survive for a few minutes while we get one back. I know where it is, and I can pull it up if people want to give me just a second. But she'll also be back on in just a second too. So we were getting ready to talk. We have like a slide that kind of shows where things are in Teams or in WebEx, and I'll just go ahead and describe that for folks. So there's a few ways to raise hands when the time comes. Down in the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little smiley face with a little plus sign, kind of like in the middle near the red exit button. And you can click on that to raise your hand if you want to be called on at any point during the conversation. You can also raise your hand if you see your name under the participants next to your name. There's a way to raise your hand, but I think that little emoji is more fun. So that's a good thing to use. Once you raise your hand, the way that these conversations work is we can take you off of mute. And once we take you off of mute, then you can participate in the conversation freely. Your mute button is down also in that bottom bar, as well as the way to stop or have your video on if you'd like. And then you'll also see in the bottom corner of your screen, there's a chat. There's like a little field with a little comment bubble or thought bubble that says chat next to it. If you pull that up, you can open up the chat and follow the chat throughout the conversation or add your own chats. And when you're in there, you can also, we've already got a long comment here that I'll take a look at later, but you can also pick that person. So again, you can either chat to everyone, or you can go ahead and chat to just me if you'd like, or chat to Linda if you have a technical concern, and we'll be monitoring those chats actively. So hopefully that gets us at least through the how WebEx works. If anybody has any questions about WebEx, go ahead and add them into the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and I'll take a look to see if anybody has any questions. Okay, great. I don't see any questions or hands raised, and I'll keep tabs if there are any questions about how WebEx works. Maya, we're glad you're back. We just kind of finished going over WebEx and how to raise your hand and stuff like that. And then
Fantastic.
Yeah. And so let's see if we can have you cover meeting logistics and see how things are going.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for your patience and practicing resilience with us this morning. So hopefully you can hear me okay, and thank you for letting me know if that is not the case. So Christy may have already covered some of these elements, but just another reminder that we'll be recording today's meeting and we'll make it available on the Oregon Global Warming's website, and that link to which Christy will be dropping in the chat if she has not done so already. If you scroll down to the bottom of that webpage under the section called Resources, you can find the draft list of actions that we will be discussing today. So second, we're asking that everyone please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your organization, and a sentence about why you're interested in this work. And you may also use the chat to ask questions while we're presenting material. Again, apologies if you just heard this, but we want to make sure that you can ask questions and then we can address them if they are relevant to the particular slide. We will do it in a moment. And any other questions that can be held for the discussion, we just ask that you note the slide number to help us facilitate that if you'd like to go back. We've set aside the final 40 minutes of the meeting for discussion. When we get to that time, Christy will remind us of any questions that were asked in the chat earlier on, and SSG will be facilitating that part of the discussion as well. Wonderful. So we can go ahead and skip this slide, I believe, and
Yep.
I will pass it over to Alan for a few words.
All right. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Christy, for stepping in. Thank you all for joining us today. Good group so far, and for your participation in this meeting. What this slide shows is our new mission and what we do statements. Your participation will directly contribute to our mission to help Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system, as our mission says. The TIGGER project will help us advance a set of climate actions that will make up the Oregon Global Warming Commission's roadmap to 2035, and that in turn helps us fulfill the rest of our mission as well. Next slide, please. So what is the roadmap to 2035? Next slide. Ultimately, what we want to create is a plan with recommended actions across all sectors of the economy that help Oregon achieve its climate goals for consideration by the governor, the legislature, and other policymakers. So how do we do that? If you think of the current level of greenhouse gas emissions Oregon will emit without any policies, programs, or actions, it's a relatively flat line, maybe a little bit declining. That's our business as usual case, that top line on the graphic to the right. Then there are all the new policies, programs, and actions that the state is already taking or is underway of putting together that will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Projects or policies like the Climate Protection Program from DEQ that will limit emissions from large stationary sources, transportation fuels, and natural gas. The expansion of the Clean Fuels Program which will decrease carbon intensity and increase and from our current goal of 10% in 2025 to 25% in 2035. And HB 2021 that will dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions from retail electricity that will result in a 90% reduction in emissions below the baseline by 2035, the end of our plan, and 100% below the baseline emissions by 2040. So we call that our business as planned line, and it lowers our line significantly. And it's the yellow portion of the graph on the right, and that line is the business as usual line. But it doesn't quite get us to our target line for our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal. That's the bottom line on the graph labeled decarbonization pathway. The TIGGER project is the work to figure out what further actions we need to take to fill that gap between the business's planned line and the decarbonization pathways line. That's the purple portion of the graph. So TIGGER project is in essence a gap analysis. What actions do we need to do to fill that gap between those two lines? And with those actions, we can, once we've got them identified through the TIGGER project, we can create the plan to meet our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals or our roadmap to 2035. And to explain that in more detail, what the TIGGER's project's 6 steps are to get to the roadmap, I'll turn that over to Maya.
Thank you so much, Alan. And I will also note that Kathy McDonald, chair of the Oregon Global Warming Commission, is also online and can be available for questions later on as well. So there are 6 key components, as Alan noted, in the process to develop the roadmap to 2035, which we'll be walking through here. So together, we're referring to this process as the TIGGER project, whereas the plan is the roadmap to 2035. And you'll probably be wondering what a MAC curve is, and we'll be sure to explain that momentarily. The Oregon Global Warming Commission is serving as a steering committee for the process and analysis to develop the roadmap, while ODO is supporting this work by providing analysis and project management. The consultant's work focuses on the first 4 out of 6 components in the process to develop the roadmap. This work involves identifying actions that can significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions or sequester carbon. It also involves evaluating the greenhouse gas reduction potential and the cost effectiveness of such actions. It involves developing sector-based MAC curves and analyzing the associated co-benefits associated with those actions that can help support an equitable clean energy transition. The analysis and findings will provide a suite of ambitious, transformative, and financially realistic decarbonization actions and pathways overall that can be used to reach or exceed Oregon's target of 45% reductions below 1990 levels by 2035. So task 1 focuses on gathering and distilling background information and conferring with state agencies and stakeholders to solicit ideas about the new actions that could be taken in Oregon. Task 2 involves developing the list of actions, the potential list of actions. So this is a broad list of actions that we'll be talking about more today, the draft list, to be modeled and determining the greenhouse gas reduction potential and cost effectiveness of these actions across sectors. Task 3 involves creating what are called as marginal abatement cost or MAC curves by sector. So what is a MAC curve? MAC curves are really just an indicator to help evaluate both the mitigation potential and the cost effectiveness of an action over a period of time. They show the total greenhouse gas emissions reduced by an action divided by the net present value of that action. So an action's net present value is just the discounted sum of the capital and operating costs of the action over its lifetime. It's really just a difference of the present value of the capital investment and the present value of the future stream of savings and revenue generated by that investment. So basically, MAC curves represent the total metric tons reduced per dollar resulting from different actions. And here you can see just an illustration of what a typical economy-wide MAC curve can look like for a given jurisdiction. Pertinent financial and emissions information is collected for developing MAC curves. This can include information on capital expenditures, energy savings or additional costs, operation and maintenance savings, and revenue generation. So this information will be used to develop the MAC curves for each sector, and then one will be developed that is economy-wide for Oregon. MAC curves serve, as I noted, as one helpful measurement to help evaluate actions, but this analysis supporting the roadmap will go beyond MAC curves. And we want to do so to help address the fact that, one, many actions can be dependent on each other, as you know, and two, many actions are likely needed to occur at the same time to achieve our greenhouse gas reduction goals. So to address this, the project also includes an analysis of how actions can be bundled or combined together to achieve Oregon's greenhouse gas targets. So this illustration that was shown earlier is just showing how the TIGGER plan can help identify a suite of actions that together can help fill in that purple wedge that's needed to achieve our targets. An integrated energy systems model will be used for this exercise. So that takes us to task 4, the co-benefits analysis. Most decarbonization studies stop where we just were, talking about the MAC curves and decarbonization pathways, which are really just a coupling of different actions together. So this roadmap will also include additional analysis to assess the societal co-benefits associated with actions. And these can include many different aspects that are important to Oregonians, from environmental impacts reduction to the potential for job creation, et cetera. The co-benefits analysis will be developed at later stages of this project, and it will follow guidance from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This work is incorporated, though, as a centerpiece of how actions will be holistically evaluated together by the Oregon Global Warming Commission when developing the plan, the roadmap to 2035. So overall, this project will assess the greenhouse gas reduction potential and cost effectiveness of individual actions, develop sector-based MAC curves, and evaluate the co-benefits that enable an equitable energy transition. And here you can see the overall project will take place over the next 1.5 years. The consultant's work is expected to be completed by the end of February 2022. So with that, I've provided the link here to the portal that you should see also on the web page that Christy put in the chat. And this is where you can address any or include any comments to help improve this plan. And then we will pass it over to the SSG team to go over the modeling process and the draft list of actions. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for your patience with the delay earlier on.
Maya, before we hand it off, we had a couple of questions that came up already in the comments. I suppose I could ask people to email the more complex ones, but there's at least a couple that I think are pretty easygoing for our purposes right now. If you're willing to go back to the sample MAC curve, I know that Julia is interested in taking a look at that example. I think, just to be clear, as Alan just put it, that sample MAC curve is just an example. It's not the one for this project. It's not what things we're going to have on our final list or anything. It's just an example. But if you wanted to take a closer look at it, please do. And then the other thing, because we kind of skimmed it over, went over it pretty quickly. The other thing I would say is we will put up both this PowerPoint presentation with all of the slides, as well as a list of the attendees on our website, because we had some curiosity about who's on the line. WebEx collects your name and your info for the most part, unless you call in by phone, and we can publish the list of who we know were on the line, if that's helpful for people. I know Helen asked for that. We also started off our day with a pretty long question from Julia. So I think it's almost sort of a bigger picture comment, but I think we could probably distill things a little bit here in a way that might be helpful. Julie, I'm just going to read it for Julia, and then go ahead, Maya, and we can decide to what extent we want to discuss this in detail at this point in the process. But emissions can be reduced by changing the energy source. Some energy sources produce almost no greenhouse gases. Increasing energy use efficiency will not be sufficient to meet the greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. Costs of energy sources now do not include the externalities of their use. Will costs include those external costs? If fossil fueled electric production has already been contracted into the future, will there be a mechanism to buy out those contracts and convert to electricity produced by sources?
Thank you so much. Yes, so the costs that I mentioned here are monetary costs. It could reflect other actions such as, that could be taken in the future. So those could be added to the draft list of actions, and that will be an active part of the discussion, really in just not a few minutes, but in about 20 minutes or so. So we really welcome to add additional actions that are relevant to including externalities. So an example is the social cost of carbon could conceptually be in that train of thought. And again, this is just an example. You can actually see this example on the web page that was shared in the chat. And it's also been in other materials such as the 2-pager that's available on the TIGGER project. So hopefully that helped clarify some of those initial big picture questions. The draft actions are across all sectors. So even though energy efficiency is one action related to the energy sector, there's a series of potential actions. I think we have approximately close to 100 across sectors that can be considered for the modeling, and then later on in the suggested recommendations.
And then we also have a couple of questions that have come up since. Thanks for answering that one, that are more about the process. But there's also one that's about our presentation, which is just a reminder to speak slowly. That's for both of us, Maya. One is, what is the time frame for commenting on this initial process?
Yes, thank you for the question, and thank you for the reminder. So we have the portal that we hope to have comments for this first part of the process by December 16th. We will be taking comments throughout the entire project to develop the roadmap. So you can feel free to always add comments as you think of them, but we'll be checking them as snapshots. So for example, December 16 comments will be used to help inform this task 2, which is to really firm up the draft list of actions to be modeled. But there will be, really important additional parts of the process, for example, the co-benefits analysis, and there'll be many other opportunities, both through stakeholder meetings, the Global Warming Commission, and snapshots when we will be bundling up public comments for those tasks.
Maya, unless I'm mistaken, I think the public comments are due the 13th.
Yes, you're correct. Thank you, Kathy, for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So if you think of this as a staged process, the first stage is to get the list. So we want comments on that. And this was ostensibly what this meeting and tomorrow's meeting are about, is to help look at the list and get new ideas from stakeholders in the public. And then also working on the co-benefits at the same time, but that's kind of the next step. That'll, and then do the modeling to get to the development of these MAC curves. And then the final step is to kind of mesh the co-benefits analysis and the economic analysis together. That will help us rejigger this MAC curve, not just based on economic analysis or economics, but based on cost and benefits, but also the co-benefits that are associated with different actions. So that will be the task of the Global Warming Commission, to then meld those together and come up with a final list, which will then that will meet our greenhouse gas emission goals, and that will be the roadmap to 2035. So this is a staged process, and we'll have this done. That final part with the Global Warming Commission will be the second half of 2022, and we'll be done with this project probably at the end of February 2023.
Great. And that actually answered the other question that we had from Helen. Thank you for the great process questions, Helen. And then finally, for anyone who joined after the, we're having folks introduce themselves if they're representing an organization to say so, and then to say, I believe in particular, what brought you here today to this conversation. And so I really appreciate, I've been reading them and it's been really great to see familiar faces and names, and then also new ones and really cool things that you all are doing around the state. So thanks for being here. And with that, I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I think we could now be ready to move on.
Excellent. Thank you again. I will stop sharing and pass it over to Chris at SSG.
Great. Thanks, Maya. Let me just go on here. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, perfect. Great. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. So my name is Chris Strashik. I'm one of the consultants working on this project. I'm an energy systems modeler, and I've been modeling various energy systems and sources for the last 20 years. And it's been a great pleasure to work with the team here on this project. And we're looking forward to getting some great feedback from you all. And behalf of me and my colleagues working on this project, we welcome you. I'll pass it over to Naomi to kind of get us kick started and talk about the process, and then I'll jump into kind of going over some of the more technical details of this project.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay, Chris?
Yep.
Just to check. Wonderful. Great to see you all here. Thanks very much for the introductions in the chat too. It helps to get to know you a bit better as well. So for today, we're going to spend the next 15 minutes on a presentation to take you through the modeling process. And thank you for the reminder to slow down. I definitely hail from Scottish people who speak way too fast. So I'll do my best to slow down, but also please don't hesitate to put a note in the chat and Penny or Chris will remind me that I've gone too fast. So presentation on the modeling process to get you acquainted with how we've gotten to the actions that we have to date and what it sort of looks like going forward. And then a presentation on action development, which sort of rounds out that process. Then we're going to do an activity together in Miro. So we'll share the link to that at the time, and we'll take you through that so that everyone has a moment to adjust to that platform if you haven't used it before, in order to gather your input. And we're going to go section by section through the actions that are either currently planned or new to get your feedback, as was mentioned by Alan previously and Maya. To take a look at the list and see if anything is missing and what else we should be adding, and we will wrap up with next steps. Next slide. That's great. And so specifically what we're here to do today is understand the project process and how you can be involved, both as today, and it's a stepped process moving forward, understand how actions themselves are developed, understand the parameterization, super fun word, process for actions. So the additional detail that goes into the thinking there, we'll talk more about that as well. And we want to receive input on additional new actions in case anything is missing. What we're not here to do today is decide on the final list of actions to be modeled. And we're not here to parameterize the actions today as well. So the output of today's meeting for us will be a list of additional actions to consider for modeling. Let's take a look at the modeling process. So back to Chris.
Thanks, Naomi. So a couple slides here to give kind of a big picture on the model that we're using and the process that we're going through to lay some context on how we need to define the actions, or how the actions kind of fit into as inputs into the model. So we're using a systems dynamics model, and you can see from this big spaghetti mess of links and nodes, the idea is to show that this is one integrated model. We're not using a whole bunch of different models that don't speak to each other and don't have interaction. As best as we can, we're modeling all of the different energy systems within the state of Oregon. And these are all interconnected in the ways that are meaningful. So you can see that from the demographics ultimately drive the energy use. and they influence land use. So if you're putting more people on the land, you're changing the land use from forest or agriculture, vice versa. If you're taking people off that land, you can be reconverting it back. The buildings that we use, how the buildings are built, so on and so forth. So this is all captured and connected in ways that we can understand and quantify in this process. So all of these are built out of the stocks and flows, which I'll get to in a minute. To reiterate what was touched on earlier, so we're looking at really addressing kind of this green part here. So the integration of the actions is an important concept because the way that we order and the actions that we add, again, because we're using an integrated systems dynamics model, they'll impact or influence each other. So as the first question that was brought up, if we can do an action that reduces the amount of energy used as well as transition to a different source of energy, and those will interact with each other, because then it'll by reducing the amount of energy that you require in a building, for example, will lessen the burden or the load of the energy that you need to produce. And so therefore possibly making it easier to generate a greener source of energy going forward. So all of these actions interact and stack on top of each other to get us down to this decarbonization pathway, or pathways that we're going to be exploring as part of this project. We're also going to be looking at the data spatially. So we're going to be modeling all of the different inputs at the county level. Oregon, obviously, as you all know, is a very diverse place. So the West is quite different from the East, the North is quite different from the South. So try and understand how these differences impact the amount of energy that we use, and the way that we use it is important for this, not only from an energy point of view, for looking at the co-benefits and equity kind of aspects of energy and how energy and emissions are generated within the state. So all of the data that we're collecting, all of the information that we're generating is going to be county specific, to be able to see kind of what the impacts of what the differences between the counties are, and to be able to model those actions kind of in that unique way. So what are stocks and flows? I mentioned those earlier. And stocks and flows are the building blocks of a systems dynamics model. A stock is a measure of a collection of objects at a specific time. And so you can think of this as the number of buildings that you have on the ground, and the number of trees that are in the forest, the number of vehicles that are currently owned. Those are all stocks of things, number of people that are in the state. And so stocks provide balance to a system, but they can also provide lag when trying to make change quickly in the system. So even though you're changing things fast, it takes a while for that stock to change, for flows to move through that stock. And the flow is a measure of change of a stock over a period of time. So the actions that we're defining are really kind of flows. We're trying to change or influence the amount of things that are moving in and out of our systems that we're looking at. And the stocks are the things that we're trying to influence. And these can move faster or slower depending on the size of the stock, the attributes or the characteristics of that stock. So in this example here, you can see even though we're putting a whole bunch, 100% of new vehicles into the stock, you can see coming out, we still have a mixture of vehicles, because that stock doesn't just automatically change over because you've changed the input. It has some resilience and some balancing properties in there that keep that slow. So when we're selecting or parameterizing the actions, we need to think about not only kind of what the input is, but when that's happening, because it can take a while for that stock to change over time. So the process that we've used to make this more Oregon specific is that we calibrate the model, and the calibration process is basically taking and tuning the model to match observed data that we've collected for the location that we're modeling. So in this case, we're looking at observed data at the county level, and we're looking at for things like observed energy use, observed number of buildings, things like that. So the way that the process works in this example, if you look at the outputs, we're looking at the space conditioning load on a building. And when we first start the model, we put in some assumptions because we don't know exactly where we need to start. And we look at it and we say, okay, well, obviously, we're not going to be balanced right away. The modeled energy is just different than what we observe. So what we do is we go through the process of tuning those input intensities. So, BTUs per square foot. We adjust those until we get to a place where we can say the observed energy use is matching the modeled energy use. And we can say at that point of time, we're starting from a place that represents what's actually going on in the state at the county level. And then that allows us to jump off into the simulation and make these actions that we're talking about. So we know we're here and we know we want to do a change. So how can we adjust these intensities to reflect what we want to see in our new pathways? So obviously, in a good example in the space conditioning, we want to reduce the amount of energy that we're using to heat or cool our homes. So we could say, well, what happens if we retrofit an existing home, or if we make the building codes more strict for new buildings? How is that's going to translate into less energy use, and what is that? How does that the reduction of energy use, I should say, translate or look like going forward into the future? So we can tune those dials now based on that, because we have a good starting point that represents what's going on, and we can move that dial around going forward. Any questions? Let's stop there for any kind of quick questions that we might have.
Yeah, we do still have some things in the chat I can go ahead and cover if that works. So I see Alan's getting ready to ask some questions. And then we had a question from Kathy Moyd first. Why was the climate protection program included, but not House Bill 2021? House Bill 2021 includes an electricity targets plus 2 types of community projects and green tariffs.
They're both included.
They're both in there apparently. Okay. And then the other question from Kathy was, what is the criterion for the high, medium, and low assessment?
Well, we'll be getting to that maybe in a bit. So let's hold off on that one, and we can, if there's still a question, we can address that.
Great. And then,
but it's basically the relative quantity of greenhouse gas emission reductions.
Okay. And then Alan Journay asks, the focus seems to be on emissions resulting from energy use. This leads to 2 questions. Does this include only combustion emissions? And what about land conversion or land use emissions?
So yes, we are including the changes in land use. So sequestration is one of the elements of the actions we'll be modeling. I'm not sure if for the first question, is Alan thinking of like consumption-based emissions? Is that the alternative that you're talking about, Alan? Oh, can't hear you, Christine.
I unmuted Alan, but not myself. Alan, you should be able to go ahead and respond to that. Journey. Alan, Journey.
I said upstream emissions. So we do include things like fugitive emissions from the transportation and distribution of fossil fuels, and those things. We don't go all the way up to modeling the refineries or the extraction processes or things like that directly.
Great. And then we also have another question. Does the model include both potential emissions reductions and potential carbon sequestration from natural and working lands?
Because I'm not sure what's meant by potential.
Possible? What do you like? Do you only consider certain emissions reductions? Is that what you're saying? Potential emissions? It doesn't seem that tricky to me, so I'm curious.
Is the question about sources, natural working lands as a source of emissions as opposed to focusing on carbon sequestration?
She's just saying, is it just about potential emissions reductions from like energy, cars, and that kind of thing? Or are we also going to include carbon sequestration?
And then Lauren has followed up, does it account for emissions from wetlands, forests, and grasslands? It's a little bit tricky to get kind of into those details. So I think it's going to be like a broadly captured as best we can. We're not doing, like a detailed forest model or grasslands kind of model. down to the biogenic kind of sources. So we're definitely mainly focusing on more of the kind of anthropogenic sources of using energy in combustion, but we are including, as I said, as best we can, sequestration opportunities and changes in land use and how that gets influenced. So if you take wetlands out or reintroduce wetlands, we can kind of model that broadly.
And maybe Kathy McDonald, Kathy, if you're available, can you
Yeah,
a little bit about natural working lands and sequestration, how we're handling it in this?
yeah, happy to. I think we can consider emissions as well as sequestration from natural and working lands. I think the level of detail that we may go to may stay focused on the kind of big areas of emissions and sequestration potential, but I think we want to be comprehensive to the natural and working lands recommendations that the commission made this summer.
And just to follow up on that, again, the list is online if folks would like to take a look at what is there right now. And we will, key part of this process too is there will be facilitation to include additional ideas of what hasn't been captured that Oregonians feel strongly about including. So thank you again for that question.
Great. And then we still have a few more questions that have come in. So Helen wants to know if the MAC curves are for each year or if we adjust for business as usual increases in emissions as business production and transportation grows as well as population. Do we just build one MAC curve or does it get updated?
So the MAC curve, like the cost in the MAC curve represent a span of time, and you take a net present value and each action can have different discount rates depending on the sector it's trying to represent. But so the time frame is basically brought down to one number using the net present value calculation. So that discounts any costs going into the future. So that's how that works.
Great. And then just quickly going back to the last conversation, just noting that we have an official request here that emissions, not just sequestration from natural and working lands, get included. So if one of our friends at SSG is taking notes today, can make sure that gets captured. And then also Kathy brought up that her question about whether or not House Bill 2021 was included was based on the spreadsheet. And I think I see a couple places where I see it, but it doesn't say House Bill 2021. But Kathy, I'll make sure that the incentive programs that you mentioned too also are clearly included there. But I think that it says like updates to RPS, but I think that is maybe meant to include the clean energy standard. But I'll make sure that it's more clear if that's helpful. I think that's a good point.
One to add to that, Christy. So in prep for this meeting and the work that we're doing, SSG, Global Warming Commission, Kathy, and ODO staff met with 9 different state agencies that are all working on global warming and climate actions in the state. In Oregon, we don't have a centralized focal point for all the actions. It's kind of dispersed across all different actions. DEQ does some, ODOT does some, ODO does some, other agencies do different things. So what we wanted to do was get all of their actions that they're taking, make sure they get included into the model as the business is planned, and have them comment on that process as well as the list. So we're making sure that everything that's being done around the state is included in that business as planned actions that are involved in the model. So HB 2021, the Clean Fuels Program, the Climate Protection Program, and all the other actions are included here. So we wanted to make sure that we got the business as planned line as accurate as possible.
Right. And that's where I think there's just, it's not, I get what she's saying. I just looked at it. It's like, I see that it's there, but I just think we could change some of the description so it's clear to others where those come from, if that's helpful for the public.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. So thank you. And I think we just have one more question and then we'll move on. And it was just when you just described, Chris, the time frame for the MAC curve, what year will you start that curve or that what will be your start
Perfect.
date?
So the calibration year is 2018. We picked that year because that's the last emissions inventory report that we're working off of. So giving us a good baseline of data to jump off from. And so then we'll projecting yearly going out from that. Well, we'll be going past 2035 to 2050, but then we can pick and choose kind of how we want to draw the line for the MAC curve. So 2035 will be, is the target we're working for here. So we'll be using that as our kind of from 2018 to 2035 as the time frame for doing that discounting.
Great, thank you. And from now on, I'll be keeping tabs on the chat and we'll ask questions at the next time it's the right time.
Awesome. Thanks, Christy. And thanks everybody for the great questions. So the action development process that we went through. So I guess just some high level on the action category. So there's two types of actions that are indicated in the spreadsheet. So new and planned. As we talked about, planned are the planned kind of actions that are either in the books or there's been a lot of progress throughout the different various state agencies going forward. So we kind of know that they're either happening or going to happen. So those will be included as part of the plan. And then the new might be, duplicates of those actions. If we think maybe those should be more aggressive, this is our time or opportunity to say, maybe what if we push those planned actions a little bit faster or harder, or there's actions that don't show up, and we need to consider include them to address that gap that we talked about earlier. The level of GHG reduction impact is high, medium, low. Again, I'll just kind of leave that there, and there's a slide going a little bit further. I'll touch base on that a little bit more. And then just a reminder, we're again here to discuss kind of new actions that we want to include from in that list. A new action, and what is a new action? It's a category of actions not currently being planned or implemented by the state of Oregon or its agencies, which will reduce or sequester greenhouse gas emissions. So there's 5 kind of general steps that we've taken to define these actions. So identify them, mapping them to the various sectors that we'll be modeling. What is their relative impacts? Parameterization. So I'll be touching base on just that process and how we need to think about taking those actions and parameterizing them for the model. And then what does defining the scenario mean? So identification, so the list that has been generated, as Alan said, we did have interviews with the various state agencies that are working on climate change and reducing our impacts. There's lots of literature out there, there's lots of policies and papers already produced by the various state agencies and other organizations. There's best practices that we've seen in other areas. And there's other studies that are out there. So all of those have come into this pot of actions. And then we need to map them to the sectors. So we need to know, understand, which sectors these are related to. Obviously there's overlap between some of them and various sectors. And like we said before, the model does capture that interaction. But broadly, we want to know, kind of what sectors we're looking at. So we'll be seeing going forward, as Maya mentioned earlier, so we'll be looking at buildings, energy generation, transportation, forestry and agriculture, industry, land use, materials, and waste are kind of the broad sectors. And these are the broad sectors that line up with the state's emissions inventory. So that's why many of these buckets were chosen to line up with what's already being measured and reported on, and also some extra ones to broaden that, obviously, going forward. So the relative impact, high, medium, and low. So these are so the way that these were come from is, based on previous experience. We've done many climate action plans and energy models for lots of cities across the U.S. and Canada. And so we know that, if an action influences a large stock or many different stocks, and has a big change, then we know that generally there's going to be a high emissions reduction. And if the action is focusing on a small or a sub portion of a sector, then generally those emissions reductions are going to be lower. Not to say that any one is more important or less important than the other. All of these things need to happen for us to transition to, you know, a low carbon future. That being said, though, you know, there is 100 actions. Probably not going to be able to model all of those 100 actions. So there is going to be some prioritization. And so this is going to help us a little bit prioritize with that. And then there's also going to be the co-benefits column that's going to help us. So even though an action might have a low GHG impact, it might have a high or a large co-benefit. So it's worth considering as part of the modeling. So we're going to be using both of those columns to help us kind of pick and choose the ones, the actions that make the most sense in the time frame that we have available. And not to say that all the rest will be ignored, but unfortunately, you know, we can't do everything all at once.
Yeah, let me underscore that a little bit, Chris. So this will be a really appropriate comment from you folks that are participating in this. So with over 100 actions, we can't model all of them. So it makes sense from a modeling standpoint to make sure you get all the high ones in there, the ones that have the biggest quantity reduction. This isn't a qualitative analysis, this is a quantitative analysis. So the highest ones are the ones that are getting hidden. And then if you were working down the list, you would just go high, and then you go to medium, and then you go to low, and as space permits within the modeling. You know, we might be able to do 50 out of 120 that we get. So, but we understand that some of these are really important and they want to show up in the plans because they potentially have really high co-benefits, either equity or environmental issues or other kinds of co-benefits that you think are important. And so an appropriate comment might be, this might be low, but we think it's really important for XYZ reasons, and therefore you should make sure it gets in the modeling. But be judicious in doing that. If you say that about everything, your comment's going to be kind of meaningless because we're not going to be able to do anything with that. So that's a really appropriate type of comment we want to hear from folks.
Thanks, Alan. So as Naomi mentioned, we're not going to be parameterizing the actions right now. So that's kind of the next step, is taking this action list and how do you translate that into inputs into the model. But just to kind of, you know, understand the process. So we do need to take, you know, some of these quantitative descriptions of things, and we need to translate them into qualitative actions. So for example, if we're looking at residential retrofits, you know, the action might be to increase the energy efficiency of existing buildings through retrofits, which is awesome. But then we need to understand, you know, how much energy are we going to, or do we think those retrofits can reduce? When are we going to start? What size? You know, how much of the stock of existing buildings do we want to retrofit by when? So an example of a parameterization would be target, you know, 75% of residential buildings built before 2019 are retrofit to decrease. You know, we're going to reduce our space conditioning by 50% and our non-space conditioning energies by 10%, for example. And we're going to do this all by 2040. So that's an example. And obviously, as we go, we can play around with these parameterizations and see what the impacts that would be on our decarbonization pathway going forward. So another example, you know, looking at the clean fuel standard, you know, that has some parameters already built into the description. So we're looking at, you know, a 10% reduction in carbon intensity from 2015 levels by 2050, and then the more stringent one here is like a 25% by 2035. So these will be, you know, some of the things we'll be thinking about or including. And just kind of skipping one more. So zero emission vehicles, we could look at hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So for heavy or medium duty, we could look at, you know, what is some of the different zero emission options to be included in the modeling. So this is kind of the next step or the next phase that we'll be looking through. So when you guys are providing us with these list of actions, the process would be to try, how do we parameterize them? And some of the actions might be bundled together into like one modelable action, but they'll be an inclusion or an integration of a number of different actions that will be in this list. And then defining scenarios. So then from this list of actions, we'll be able to take, you know, pick the actions that we want, that we think will be most impactful, have the most co-benefits, and we model them together. And as I mentioned earlier, these are be integrated actions. So one action may or can influence another action. So we can pick, these are examples just made up. So, we could look at a rapid decarbonization. So what if we do a lot of things really quickly? What if we, do things maybe a little bit more slowly, but there'll be some technologies that we know are kind of on the cusp that we can introduce to look at what the differences could be within those pathways. And again, just going back to this, so those scenarios are built up of all of the different actions. So starting all the way up from the business as usual, including the things that we've included in the business as planned, and then the new actions that we'll be looking at together so all of these things will have to be done in order to get to this decarbonization pathway that we're looking at. So it's not going to be just one or two things that happen. It's all the things that we'll be modeling are essential for getting us there. And then last but not least, poor co-benefits always gets thrown in at the end, but an important part of this project is, as we mentioned, looking at co-benefits. And I noticed in the chat there was a mention of co-harms, and that was actually an important aspect that we've considered as well. So not only co-benefits, but reducing the co-harms. So an example, if vehicle travel, there's particulates, there's emissions in the air, which is harmful for people and leading to things, lung disease, asthma, and things like that. So not only benefiting things like reducing the amount of fuel that you're using or things like that, but also reducing the amount of harm that's in the environment as well. So having happier residents because there's less particulates, less smog, less things like that in our air that we're breathing on a day-to-day basis. So excellent point. I didn't remember who brought that up, but so that's in general the process that we're going through. I don't know, Christy, we have maybe a couple minutes here before we want to actually jump in and get to the list of actions, because we only have about a half hour left. So maybe a couple minutes for any major questions that I missed.
Oh, there are so many questions. I'm trying to
answer some of them later, but
cancel them. So let's see. From the top here, there was some chatter about where do we get the forestry data. Alan, just know that Kathy McDonald put in the chat where's the best place to get that data. So you can look at that. We have an idea that high impact action would be banning the sale or registration of new internal combustion engine vehicles after 2030, like the Oregon or Washington legislature has done. So just a point there. We just talked about co-benefits. So we have a question on co-benefits being included with a long comment. We'll be keeping all of these chats and comments, but just know we are going to be considering co-benefits for sure. So totally agree. Then a question about from Angus Duncan, who used to be the longtime chair of the Oregon Global Warming Commission. Ideally, the model will incorporate probability of action, near, mid, long-term effects, and time between investment and outcome. Understanding that there are limits to what any model can deliver, to what extent will this modeling exercise incorporate these?
I'll answer that one more directly. So the way we're looking at this is that those actions in our business as planned that have a legislative target or a rule target or have a funding appropriated already are definitely going to be in the plan. And then you kind of go down to the next level of actions that are highly likely to be implemented and funded, and those will be in the plan as well. And then you kind of get gradients below that, right? So what the Oregon Global Warming Commission's job is to weigh the probability and the co-benefits of these actions as they formulate the roadmap to 2035. So the TIGGER project is actually the data and analysis part of this to get the Global Warming Commission the information they need to incorporate all of those things into a plan. And again, that's going to happen in the summer and fall of 2022, with the end product being at the beginning of 2023.
And then from there, we had a question about, are we looking at the opposite of co-benefits? By the way, there was another point about banning internal combustion engines earlier. And then if we're looking at co-benefits, are you also looking at the opposite? Trade-offs, burdens, risks? And if so, does that help prioritize?
I would say yes, we are looking at the whole picture around that. Co-benefits is obviously a nice way to package it, but there is kind of the co-harms as well.
And then Michael Mitten, who I know, nice to see you, Michael, has brought up methane. And I believe that this is something that could come up in the next part of the conversation as a list of possible actions, Michael, but we are tracking that. I know he's wondering how methane will be, or methane, cleaning up methane leaks, how about that, would be incorporated into the model. But I think we can have him make sure that we cover methane where it ought to be covered, in his opinion, in the exercise to come. And then more about forestry, kind of a back and forth is happening in the chat.
Okay.
Will we be incorporating upstream? Will we be
Christy, one
incorporating upstream?
Christy, one comment on the co-benefits. So this isn't the only shot at co-benefits. There'll be a whole nother set of meetings like this one for stakeholders and public around the co-benefits analysis and what those co-benefits should be, how they should be treated, and what they're going to do. The ultimate decider on that is the Global Warming Commission, but we'll have a whole set of straw proposal co-benefits that we'll be able to look at, and then people will be able to comment on, just like we're going to do today. So that's upcoming. What we're interested in right now is that question I asked earlier is, are there co-benefits on these low or medium ones that pop them up into a higher criteria for making sure that they get into the modeling part?
Great.
Because not everything can be modeled.
Great. Okay, great. And then let's see. Upstream effects of fuels, such as extraction leakage. I think that we can potentially make sure those get covered in the list of possible actions that we're getting ready to present or choose an activity on. Wanting co-harms to be summarized on the action list is a request. Finally, a question on timing. Helen, just so you know, as Alan said, this will be done February of 2023-ish. So in time for the beginning of the session, but not early enough to request bills for the session. The idea is that we'll be working through the process and they'll be able to see kind of where we're going. And so legislators, or perhaps the agency, can grab some concepts earlier than that, or stakeholders working with legislators, but not that this will be done in time for the bill draft deadline ahead of session. And with that, we've gone through most of the comments, and thanks for those who allowed us to kind of move into the activity, and hopefully you can make sure your thing you want to make sure is included is covered here.
All right, great, Christy. So I'm going to pass it back over to my colleague Naomi, and she's going to guide us through the exercise using Miro.
It's wonderful. Thanks so much, Christy and Chris. So yeah, we're going to go into Miro. I've just placed a request in the chat, and then here comes the link. So you can jump on into Miro with us, for those of you who are in front of your computers. And then not to worry though, if you're not in front of your computer and can't jump into Miro, we can take submissions through the chat as well. Or if you can't type in the chat, we'll need to let Christy know and we can unmute you and we can write down what it is that you say as we come to that category, each category. So Chris, if you can share, flip over to the Miro board, we'll start the demonstration. So what you can see there is here's Miro. So it's like, basically, if you're not familiar with it, it's an online whiteboard tool. So we've already set this up for you, and we'll just do a practice session in a moment. Just before I dive in, what you'll see is 8 action areas. So we're going to divide our time and go through them one by one, but you're also free to move around yourself, too. So if we're talking about a particular area and you want to comment specifically on another area, please feel free to do so to make sure that we receive your action suggestions before today's meeting is over. So there's flexibility in terms of how you participate. You can stay with us as part of the live conversation, or you can move on at your own pace and with your own at your leisure. So you can also control. First thing is, you'll notice what I'm about to do, or here is we're going to move into the building actions in the upper left. So you can zoom in. to that area. So Chris, if you want to zoom in to building actions, that would be great. And if you're on the board there, wherever you are, I can bring you to me and I'll start that each time we go to a new section. So there you go. You can see all your cursors, your visitors. Sort of here, you'll see the SSG team names. So you're also anonymous in terms of leaving your suggestions here as well, unless of course you put them in the chat, but directly on the Miro board, you're anonymous. And so we're going to get you to move, take a look at the planned actions. So for building actions, I'll dive into this in a moment, but we have the planned actions on the left, the new actions that have already been generated as part of this process. And we're going to want you to put your additional actions sort of over here on the right. There's a few ways to do this. We've made it easy, but if on the toolbar, you select your...
Can I have you, Naomi, can you slow down for a second? We're getting a request, a question here, just long enough so I can interrupt when things come up.
Yes.
But how does one enlarge the Miro so that if it sounds like Helen's in Miro, how does she make it bigger so she can?
Yeah, I can maybe I'll jump in just because I'm using the mouse here. So you can see Helen on the bottom of my screen here. There's a canvas that represents the bigger canvas. You can use the plus or minuses to scroll in and out. You can use this to fit it to your screen. You can zoom in to this. You can click around on the screen itself, and it'll drag the canvas around. So I hope that answered your question.
Does that help?
And again, if anybody's finding it a little bit challenging to use this, if you want to put your questions in the chat, we can transfer those from the chat to the Miro board for you.
There are less questions, right? But more additional things that you don't see on the list that you would like to see. Great. And then also just a reminder, Naomi, to calm the inner Scott.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit more slowly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And so also I noticed you said you cannot access the screen. Yes, sometimes that happens. So you want to make sure you click on the link in the chat and it'll open up in your browser and then you'll be in Miro and have full ability to zoom in and out. We've just got the screen up to for demonstration purposes, but want everyone to be able to jump into Miro itself. But again, if that isn't possible or it's not working for you, placing the new action that you'd like us to consider in the chat along with the associated area. So for example, building actions that you'd like us to consider, let us know it's a building action and we will add it for you. So I'm going to, so if you can zoom in, Chris, to the additional board that's there, I'm going to, some people are already diving right in, but I will demonstrate on the bottom right of the corner, there's a blue square, a blue sticky note, and you'll see my name over it. And I've clicked on it and I've moved it up to the right. And if you double click inside of a sticky, a cursor will appear and you can begin typing just like this. And it will automatically size to the space there. So the text will keep getting smaller. So you can type freely without worrying about that, and you can readjust the size sort of after by clicking on the sticky itself and adjusting the handles. There's 4 points that you'll see that will come up for you that will be live. I think there's no password needed. We've got a lot of participants in there. So are you having trouble getting in, Penny? I'll put the link in again into the chat, sort of right there, and see if is anyone having trouble getting into the link. It's an open board though. There's no. It might take a moment for Miro to load. Sometimes it's a little bit slow, and that will depend sometimes on your internet connection. So if that's the case, I would just encourage you to put the suggestions into the chat.
Yep, and I'm here to grab anything from the chat and put it on a post-it in Miro for anybody who needs to just use the chat to add any things that they don't see on the list that they want to see added.
Okay, so if you're getting a 404 error, you can sort of see on the screen, there's a variety of participants who've been able to make it in. I'm not sure why that's happening to you, so my apologies, but let's go the chat route for you. And then for the person who's got the big yellow sticky there about emissions upstream, so if you can just adjust your sticky so that it's smaller so other people can fit theirs on, that would be great. or click off of it and we can do it, but I can't adjust it when you're live on it, and that's what's happening right at the moment. Okay, there we go. Perfect.
Correct.
Wonderful. Okay, so okay, that worked, Julia. I'm really glad to hear that you got in there. That's wonderful. Okay, so let's take a look then now at building actions themselves. So we have a description of the actions here, the planned ones on the left. You'll see 3. Over for the new, we have a series of new actions and the co-benefits associated. And so this is an opportunity. We just want to make sure you get a chance to throw in what new additional actions you'd like to be considered in the process. And thanks for your assistance there, Penny. So I'm going to move through so we can see all of the categorization areas. The next one I'm going to go to, if we scroll down, Chris, is to energy actions. So energy is the next category.
One second, just responding to Helen. I guess I can speak to Helen. Also, too, Helen, if you follow along, these are the actions copied out of the spreadsheet. They're just filtered out by the various categories. So I'll keep it zoomed in like this, but also you can go look there as well. And so moving down to energy, I'll keep it as zoomed in as I can to be able to see as much as we can.
Energy is a big one. So
Yes.
there's lots of new and a good amount of planned ones. And so this will be great to see. It's a good exercise to see what potentially might be missing in here. So we look forward to your feedback on that. And if you have a particular new action for energy after you've had an opportunity to read what's already on the board, again, please let us know in the chat, and you can just put the word energy, in a colon in front of it so that we know it goes there. But if not, we'll come back to you and ask to make sure that your action makes it onto the correct board. All right, let's scroll down now to the next one, Chris. So the next one's transportation, just below action. In order to stop, yeah, we can show you that too in terms of seeing the actual cursors move around. Chris, if you go to the top toolbar and you go to the left of the little party reaction symbol, and you'll see up there, so at the top of your Miro board, so individually you can each do this. You can, and we can do this too in case it's distracting on the screen. There's a little blue arrow with some lines to the right. And if you click on that or hover over it, it says hide collaborators cursors. And so if you do that, then those cursors will disappear and you'll just see your own, and it'll be less distracting for you. Okay. And it looks like we've got an action for Helen, from Helen to add to the transportation board. So if we can grab that, Penny, that would be great. And put that in the additional area.
There's also one, 2 above there about restore tidal wetlands.
That's great. And which board should we be adding that one to? Or if you know, Chris, we can just add that, make sure that we add that into the correct board. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Chrissy. All right, let's scroll down too so you can see the next category. And it looks like we've got some great participation on there to begin with, or to start. So we're going to go down to forestry and agriculture actions if you're watching on WebEx. So again, same pattern. You can see the list of planned actions. All the co-benefits are assigned there. It seems like we've already had some really good discussion about forestry and agriculture, sequestration, natural lands, those types of things. So I'm sure this group will have a lot of good things to suggest here as well. And just a side note too, it's okay to make a larger post-it note, but just keep in mind too, we want to, if you zoom in, you'll be able to see the board itself gets, sort of bigger for you. But if we move that out of the way to make sure that other stickies can sort of be seen, that would be fantastic. All right. Okay, so let's go over to the right, to the next side or the next column of boards. And we're going to go over to waste. Just so you can see there's the waste category here. And I'll bring you all to me, and just in case you're not sure what that is, or you've dug down into another action area. So feel free to hover back to that. But if you were wondering where waste was, that's here. So we've got one planned action and we've got a few new actions. So definitely looking for your feedback on what additional new actions can be planned for here. All right, and then materials. Yep. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
To interrupt. I did get a question about, Helen, I'm working on getting all yours. And then I also just wanted to say that we got a question on better to send comments when they're kind of more complicated than what would fit on a note here. And we do have a portal, we'll share it again at the end of the conversation, for comments to be delivered in a way for more complex than just adding items to the list, like we're doing with this exercise.
Right. So there's also good point to point out right now that there's also multiple ways you can put it here. One is this process with the Miro whiteboard. We're going to do the same thing tomorrow. So if you think of something and you want to chime in tomorrow, you can add it there tomorrow as well, because we're going to do this again. And then there's into the portal in the Global Warming Commission's website. You can enter things there, especially if they're more complicated. So multiple ways to get input into this process for you.
That's great. Thank you for that. Let's scroll up to the next category. We'll just make sure we get through all of the categories too before our time is up. Materials actions is the next one. Chris, did you want to talk about what we mean by materials actions?
Yeah, so this is kind of it's a newer area of focus, so there's not as much information and data available to these things, but trying to think about well, in this case, so you can see the plan is kind of related to landfills and capturing the waste or the emissions from the materials we're throwing away. So that could have been under waste, but the new action is looking at looking at the materials that we're using to build our buildings, especially around cement. As many of you know, cement is a high emission producing process. And so if we can reduce the amount of cement, or we can use different processes to produce that cement, and even kind of capture carbon within that, those are some of the things that we'd want to try and look at as best we can, even though it's still kind of an emerging field.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. It's always fun to be part of an emerging field. And let's scroll up to the next one, a big and important one as well, and it's land use. So we've got one planned action, a few of the new actions as well. And then last one, let's scroll up to the top, and it's industry actions. And that's giving us, we've now toured through the entire Miro board for all of the category areas for you to provide input on new actions. So we have a couple of questions too. So I'll go back up. So this is for you, Chris. Then how is the modeling going to deal with the assumption that not reducing emissions in any given year is a constant when it clearly is not?
Yeah, I was looking at that. So not reducing is a constant. I guess you're assuming that.
Did you need any clarifying?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand how to interpret that. I don't know if Naomi or Alan, or maybe how.
Does that mean that so if we don't do anything, emissions are going to go up, and so with our actions they get reduced, but embedded in the model is still the business as usual scenario that has it going up over time. So
Yeah.
And the emissions that we have planned reduce that, and then so at the end, even with the emissions reduced, we're still going to see without any of those business as planned actions, we'd see an increase in the amount of emissions in the model. And so with the planned ones and the TIGGER ones, then we'll get to that endpoint in 2035, which will be the emissions in 2035. Hope that answers it.
Yeah, and I guess thinking back to those wedge diagrams, so what we're, the business as usual, that's kind of, it's a given that it's clearly not going down if we don't do anything, right? So there's that, and then the other, like the business is planned and the decarbonization pathways, those are obviously not going to set in stone either. There's a lot of work that will have to be done to make those things happen, but we're trying to at least explore what the possible outcomes would be by modeling these actions. So if we could get people to make these changes at these rates, at these in these intensities, what could our possible low carbon pathway look like? So obviously, a lot of work still to be done after this as well. So as far as embodied carbon, we're not looking at embodied carbon in all consumption that's going on in the state. That is important, but that is a project in and of itself for sure, and a lot trickier to find data and around and understand and quantify that.
And can I just add one other note on that, on the comments Chris and Ellen shared? You know, at the end of the day, we're trying to build the best model that we can that can help us identify actions that the commission can propose further. And, you know, those actions are going to be really what the roadmap is focused on, not so much getting the precise amount of accumulated greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, although that's, you know, those are all critical metrics to include, but the focus is really on how can we develop a plan to mitigate future emissions. So hopefully that helps. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you to all three of you for that. And then there was a question, I believe this is Helen, but Christy, please let me know if I've gotten that incorrect. Cap and trade, all cap and trade systems assume that the costs of kicking it down the road does not increase. So does it not account for the accumulation in the atmosphere? Who would like to answer that question?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think that if I'm understanding it correctly, relates to the last question that we were trying to address, which is, you know, this isn't a dynamic Earth systems model. This is an analysis to inform actions that the state can take. So, you know, yes, there are emissions that are accumulating, you know, across different jurisdictions every year, and we are trying to identify what we can do to help mitigate Oregon's contribution to that.
And maybe a way to think about the roadmap to 2035 is that in the end, what the Global Warming Commission will create is a plan to meet our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals. And so it'll have the business as planned stuff in it, but then it'll have the TIGGER actions in it that'll fill that gap. And so in the end result of that will be a list of actions that have rough costs and rough estimates of quantity reduced and the co-benefits associated with them. And then when we prioritize those, it'll kind of build in the next step, which will be of this process, which is outside the roadmap to 2030, which is the implementation plan for each one of those actions. They have to be fully vetted, more thoroughly detailed analysis and funded. And that implementation plan then has to live somewhere in different agencies around the state or in different with other people. And so those things are the kind of the follow on to the roadmap to 2035, which is basically what actions should we be doing? What's the best bang for our buck and biggest impact to get to our, and then we got to figure out how to implement them. So how to implement them is after the 2035 roadmap is built.
Fantastic.
And if we delay and take them too long, Helen, yeah, it'll cost more. We'll have more to do because we delayed.
Great. I think there was, I'm sorry, I was putting Helen's and other people's Post-its on, so I might have missed that you all talked about this, but did somebody bring up community solar? Did anybody ask about that? someone just asked if community solar was on the list. And I don't know if it already is or not. I guess I could have
It
gone
is.
and looked, but okay, it's already on the list, Bob.
Great,
Great.
great question. Thank you for that. So it looks like waste needs some attention, I was saying, but or if you do think a list is complete, that's also good information to know as well. Or it just might not be your jam today of what you want to comment on.
We do have Naomi, we do have a great materials management group in DEQ, and I believe they are taking a look and providing additional ideas for this topic.
Oh, fantastic. That's really good to hear. All right, so it looks like, I think, Christy or Penny, were you able to grab the buildings suggestion from Catherine?
I can, sure. I also, Jasmine, I can't, I don't think I can chat. Maybe I can chat you back, but it's, oh yeah, I can't. Never mind. I'll chat you back privately. Thanks. Sorry, I thought I couldn't because you're not a panelist. But... And then I will work on Catherine's.
Wonderful.
We also got a tip that we should put more information on Miro on the agenda. We have the same meeting tomorrow, so maybe it'd be helpful to put it on the agenda online or somehow share it with people in the beginning or something like that.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you for that
put
feedback.
Link on the web too.
But we do already have a link to the Miro tutorial somewhere, Alan. Sorry, I didn't know that. Okay.
No, I think we can.
Yeah.
We have a question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it looks like we have about 4 more minutes left. Do we want to pass it back to Alan to talk about next steps, or?
We have a couple of questions remaining. So yeah, I'm wondering if we don't answer them here, then we can get back to them. We can put the responses, I believe, on the website, but correct me if I'm wrong. We want to make sure that we get these questions answered.
Also promised Dylan Plummer that he'd have a chance to make a comment at the end at some point. I don't know when that was planning to happen, but Alan chatted him that we were doing public comment at the end. And I don't know if that's the plan or we need to somehow let him talk at some point.
I think we can take a few more minutes for responding to public comments and then spend a minute at the end on the next steps. That sounds like a good plan.
Sounds good. I think then, Alan, you might be best to answer this question. Where does recycling fit? Or Maya? Oregon just passed a major recycling bill.
I think that would go well in the materials, but again, the categories aren't the most important thing. It's that we have them somewhere on the list, and then you know, they can be recategorized. So thank you so much for all of this great input.
Yeah. Chris, this is for you. What about large non-industrial facilities such as schools, hospitals, prisons, etc.?
Yeah, we are including those as well to the best of our ability. So we do have various building archetypes. Those are ones that we include.
Fantastic. And given the urgency of emissions reductions, the time dimension, the investment to action, the investment or action to outcome is critical. Otherwise, a list of actions is just another sterile exercise in list making. If the model incorporates this dimension, it would be welcome to be assured that time to outcome is incorporated.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this answers your question, Angus, but I'll give it a shot. So like I said, when we parameterize their action, we do have to have like a start time when things are happening. And, you know, I'm assuming that all of us are agreed that, you know, they have to happen now to start now. And then there's also an endpoint on when things are happening. So, and that endpoint will obviously influence, you know, how we're going to meet the target outlined by the state and the Global Warming Commission. So we'll be looking when we parameterize those, and as we're building the scenarios, we'll see, you know, how are we actually meeting our target? If we're not meeting our target, why not? Do we have to go faster? You know, do we have to go more aggressive in you know, the energy reductions? What's going on there? So that is incorporated in the model, the timing of when things need to happen, and by how much. So I hope that answers your question.
That's great. And I think we'll have to cut questions off now at this point. And for any sort of new ones, I think we're going to run out of time. But the last one is, where is greenhouse gas for in-state E that is exported? I think it might be in-state energy. I'm not entirely sure. But perhaps that's something where we can answer it sort of post-meeting. So what I'll do is I'll turn it back.
I'm sure that's energy because we export a fair amount.
Okay. Is that incorporated here? What greenhouse gas for in-state energy that is exported? Do we know
We
that?
can capture that and add it if it's not already included.
Okay. Fantastic. Great. I'm going to turn it back to Chris for next steps. And then, yeah, I think there's time for Dylan, but we'll go back to Alan after that. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation and your suggestions.
Actually, I think we're going to hand it over to Alan to lead us out.
Before we do that, just a quick note that there were a lot of questions and comments that came into the chat. We hear you. We'll make sure that these get recorded and captured into this. We can just pull all the chats out and have them as notes for the meeting or part of the notes for the meeting, and then we can cull those. So I don't want you to think anything's lost in there.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. So the next steps here, and Alan, please feel free to jump in, are to, as we've noted, refine the list of actions, incorporating all this feedback, which we'll be doing, over the course of several days. There will be 2 subcommittee meetings of the Global Warming Commission mid-December that will help, review this list, and then there will be a Global Warming Commission's meeting on January 6th. That will be focused on the roadmap work and voting on that list of actions to be modeled. And that will, we will also be defining the scenarios based on those actions. So again, the scenarios, which are already discussed quite a bit here, the business as usual and the business as planned, the main key scenarios are how do we bundle these actions for 2 different decarbonization pathways. So again, please feel free to reach out to email to myself or Chair McDonald and add comments as you think of them on that portal. And for any who are static to think about this topic again, we will be here tomorrow morning covering the same material, and really, really welcome all the wonderful input that we've received today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you from me as well.
Yeah, and just thank you from me as well. And remember that there's multiple ways and multiple times to be able to get input into us. If that we went too fast, you can hear the whole thing tomorrow again, and you can also participate in the whiteboard if you forgot something. You can also put it in the portal. It's also going to be the January 6th Global Warming Commission meeting, but you can always send us information through the portal or questions and comments through the portal. So anyway, there lots of ways to get us your input. And of course, on the website, we have this presentation and the list of actions. So thank you again for coming today.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks very much.